Something broke today. Not a ceasefire, not a ship. Something more important than either of those things. The diplomatic process that was supposed to pull the United States and Iran back from the edge of total war has hit a wall. And the wall is Iran's response to the American 14-point peace proposal. A response so far from anything Washington could accept that the President of the United States read it and immediately posted on social media that it was totally unacceptable. Oil prices jumped nearly 5% within hours of that post. The markets understood immediately what that reaction means. This is not over. This is not getting better. And the next 72 hours may determine whether we are heading toward a deal or toward something far worse. Let me start with the economic signal because I think it is the most honest indicator we have of where this situation actually stands. When Trump posted those words on Truth Social, when he said he does not like Iran's response and called it totally unacceptable, oil prices moved nearly 5% higher almost instantly. Markets do not lie. Markets do not have political agendas. Markets price the probability of future outcomes with billions of dollars of real money. And what the oil market said this morning, with that 5% move, is that the probability of this conflict continuing, of the Strait of Hormuz staying closed, of the global energy disruption getting worse rather than better, just went up significantly. Every government on earth that imports oil felt that move. Every consumer who fills a gas tank will feel it within days. That is the cost of a failed diplomatic moment. That is what happens when a peace process collapses in real time. Now, I want to be direct about something that a lot of analysts in Washington are being very careful not to say clearly, and that is this. Iran's response to the American proposal was not a serious attempt to reach an agreement. I have read the descriptions of what Iran submitted through Pakistan. I have listened to what Iranian officials said publicly about their own proposal, and what I see is a document designed to look like engagement while actually demanding that the United States accept defeat as the price of peace. Iran wants all sanctions lifted. Iran wants all frozen assets released. Iran wants American military forces out of the region. Iran wants recognition of its control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran wants war reparations, and Iran wants to continue enriching uranium. In exchange for all of that, Iran is offering to stop the very thing that Iran started when it closed the strait in response to a military operation that was designed to prevent Iran from building a nuclear weapon capable of threatening every country in the region. That is not a peace proposal. That is a list of demands written by a side that believes it is winning and wants the other side to acknowledge it publicly. The question I keep coming back to, and I want to be honest with you about the complexity of this, is whether Iran is actually winning, or whether Iran has simply made the cost of continuing high enough that Washington is looking for an exit. Because those are two very different things. Iran has made the situation extremely painful. The closed strait, the oil prices, the stranded ships, the economic pressure on American allies in the Gulf. All of that is real, and all of that is costly. But costly is not the same as winning. Iran's infrastructure has been devastated. Iran's nuclear program has been significantly set back. Iran's supreme leader was killed. Iran's top military commanders were killed. Iran's air defense systems were destroyed in the opening hours of the campaign. Iran's economy, which was already weak from years of sanctions, is under enormous additional stress from the war. The fact that Iran can still close the strait does not mean Iran is winning the broader strategic competition. It means Iran built a specific capability, the ability to threaten shipping in a narrow waterway that survived the American strikes. That is a real capability, but it is not the same as strategic victory. And now I want to talk about something that happened this morning that most of the coverage has missed, and that is what is happening with American air power in the region, specifically the F-35s. For the second time in 24 hours, a United States Air Force F-35A squawked a 7700 emergency code over the Sea of Oman this morning. The aircraft changed course toward the UAE and made an emergency landing at Al Dhafra Air Base, the same base where the previous emergency landing occurred yesterday. 2 F-35 emergency landings in 2 days over the same operating area. Now, I want to be careful here because I do not want to speculate beyond what the evidence supports. Emergency codes can be triggered by many things, some serious and some relatively routine. But 2 in 2 days in the same airspace, near the same operating area where Iranian electronic warfare assets are known to be active, near the same waters where Iranian forces have been engaging American naval assets, is a pattern that deserves serious attention. The F-35 is the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. If Iranian electronic warfare is affecting its systems in ways that require emergency landings, that is information that American commanders need to understand and address. Let me turn to China, because what Beijing announced today changes the diplomatic landscape of this entire crisis in ways that are not yet fully appreciated. China's foreign ministry announced that President Trump will pay a state visit to China from May 13 to 15, 3 days from now. The President of the United States is going to Beijing in the middle of a war that involves Iran, which is one of China's most important energy partners, in the middle of trade negotiations between America and China, in the middle of a global economic disruption caused by the closed Strait. That visit is not coincidental. That visit is not just about trade tariffs. That visit is about the full range of American and Chinese strategic interests, and the Strait of Hormuz and Iran sit right at the center of those interests. China needs the Strait open. China gets 30% of its oil through that waterway. China has enormous economic incentive to use its relationship with Iran to push Tehran toward a deal. And America needs China to use that leverage. The Trump-Xi meeting in 3 days may be the most important diplomatic event of this entire crisis. More important than any of the Pakistan-mediated exchanges between Washington and Tehran. But at the same time that this diplomatic opening is emerging, Netanyahu is on CBS saying something that complicates it significantly. Netanyahu said that China has provided support and technical components for the manufacture of Iranian missiles. He said he does not approve of this. He said Israel is facing a media blackout and an international propaganda campaign, and has not been successful enough in what he called the propaganda war. And he said some Arab nations want to strengthen their alliance with Israel because Israel deters Iran. Let me take each of those statements seriously for a moment. The claim about Chinese components in Iranian missiles is significant if true. It means that when Trump sits down with Xi in Beijing in 3 days, one of the items on the table will be China's role in enabling the very military capability that is currently causing the global energy crisis. That is a very uncomfortable conversation to have, but it is a necessary one. If American intelligence confirms that Chinese components are in the missiles that close the Strait, that changes the terms of the trade negotiation between Washington and Beijing in fundamental ways. Netanyahu's comment about the propaganda war is also revealing, and I want to be honest about it, even though some of what I am about to say is uncomfortable for Israel's supporters. Netanyahu is right that the international media environment has been difficult for Israel during this conflict. Images from Lebanon, images of civilian casualties, images of displaced families have dominated global coverage in ways that have damaged Israel's international standing. But I want to make a distinction between two different things. There is the media narrative, which is shaped by images and emotions and political sympathies. And then there is the strategic reality. Strategically, Israel achieved something enormously significant on February 28th. It participated in eliminating the supreme leader of a country that has been dedicated to Israel's destruction since 1979. It participated in significantly degrading Iran's nuclear program. The cost has been high. The international reaction has been harsh. But the strategic logic of removing the most powerful anti-Israel figure in the region is real, regardless of how the media covers it. Now let me address the satellite images of Israel's secret base in the western Karbala desert in Iraq, because I think this is one of the most geopolitically significant pieces of information to emerge in recent days. High-resolution satellite images show a base that was active at least until March 2nd, just 2 days after the operation began, with helicopters, equipment, and deployment tents clearly visible. This is an Israeli military base in Iraq, operating in the western desert near the Jordanian border. Think about what that means operationally. Israel has forward-deployed military assets into Iraqi territory, hundreds of kilometers from Israeli borders, in a position that provides operational reach into Syria, into eastern Jordan, and potentially into western Iran. The existence of this base tells you several things. It tells you that the operational planning for February 28th was far more sophisticated and far more geographically extensive than public reporting has suggested. It tells you that Israel has been working with elements inside Iraq, or has been operating in Iraqi territory without Iraqi government knowledge, which is a significant geopolitical complication. And it tells you that the military campaign that began on February 28th has geographic dimensions that extend well beyond the strikes on Iranian territory that dominated the news coverage. The Iraqi government's reaction to these images will be important to watch. Iraq has a complicated relationship with both Iran and the United States. Iran has enormous political influence over large parts of the Iraqi government and security forces. America has military forces in Iraq under an arrangement that has been politically contested for years. The revelation of an Israeli base on Iraqi soil, if confirmed, and if the Iraqi government decides to respond publicly, could create a significant new diplomatic crisis layered on top of everything else that is already happening. Let me talk about South Korea and the HMM Namu, because the attack on this South Korean cargo ship and Seoul's vow of retaliation opens a dimension of this crisis that has the potential to expand it in dangerous directions. South Korea is a major American ally. South Korea has significant economic interests in the Persian Gulf region. South Korea imports a substantial portion of its energy through the Strait of Hormuz. And now South Korea has a ship that was attacked in that strait and a government that is publicly vowing retaliation. What does South Korean retaliation look like? Against whom? Under what legal framework? South Korea cannot conduct military operations in the Strait of Hormuz independently without either American authorization or American support. So if Seoul is serious about retaliation, it means South Korea is asking Washington for permission and for backup. And that creates pressure on the Trump administration to respond more forcefully to Iranian actions in the Strait, at exactly the moment when Trump is also trying to negotiate a deal and is flying to Beijing to meet Xi. The multiple, simultaneous pressures on American policy are becoming almost impossible to manage coherently. I want to address something directly that I think is the most honest assessment I can give of where American strategy stands right now. Trump said this week that negotiations with Iran are his responsibility and no one else's. That statement is both true and concerning. It is true in the sense that presidential authority over foreign policy and war and peace decisions is constitutional and appropriate. But it is concerning because the evidence of the last several days suggests that the management of this negotiation is not following any coherent strategic framework. You cannot simultaneously post totally unacceptable on social media, cause a 5% oil price spike, and then claim that you are managing a delicate diplomatic process responsibly. You cannot simultaneously negotiate a deal with Iran through Pakistan and have your closest ally go on CBS and accuse China of providing missile components to Iran 3 days before you are scheduled to visit Beijing. These things are not coordinated. They are not part of a coherent strategy. They are the actions of an administration that is managing an enormously complex, multi-front crisis reactively, responding to each development as it comes, without a clear strategic framework connecting the pieces. And that incoherence is dangerous. Not because incoherence is unusual in government. It is not unusual. Governments are always more chaotic internally than they appear from the outside. It is dangerous because the other side, Iran, is watching carefully. Iranian military planners and Iranian diplomats are analyzing every Trump social media post, every Netanyahu interview, every F-35 emergency landing report, every South Korean statement. They are building a picture of American decision-making. And the picture they are building is of an administration under enormous pressure, politically weakened, economically constrained by rising oil prices, militarily frustrated by the limits of what air power can achieve against a dispersed and hardened adversary, and diplomatically isolated from key partners like China. From that picture, Iran's hardliners draw a conclusion that makes a deal harder, not easier. They conclude that time is on Iran's side, that the longer this continues, the more the American political situation deteriorates, that the right move is to hold firm, make maximalist demands, and wait for Washington to come back with a better offer. The only thing that breaks that Iranian calculation is a credible demonstration that the costs of continuing are higher than the costs of settling. And right now, despite everything that has happened, Iran does not believe the costs of continuing are too high. The ceasefire is fragile but holding at a basic level. The Strait is closed but manageable for Iran's economy. The new supreme leader is consolidated in power. The IRGC is functioning. The axis of resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, is still operating. From Tehran's perspective, the situation is painful but survivable. And survivable means no deal on American terms is necessary. What changes that calculation? Several things could change it. China, in the Trump-Xi meeting in 3 days, could deliver a private message to Iran that Beijing's economic support has limits, and that the relationship depends on Iran showing flexibility in the negotiations. That message from China carries more weight than any American threat, because China is Iran's most important economic lifeline. If Xi tells Tehran that China cannot continue absorbing the costs of the closed strait indefinitely, Tehran's hardliners have a much harder argument to make. Additionally, a credible signal from Washington that the military option remains on the table, not a social media post, but actual visible military preparation, movement of forces, positioning of assets, the kind of signal that military planners in Tehran take seriously, could shift the calculation. Iran is rational. Iran responds to real costs and real threats. What it does not respond to is angry posts in capital letters. Let me be honest about what I think the next week looks like. Trump goes to Beijing on May 13th. The conversation with Xi will include the Strait, Iran, Chinese missile components, and trade. If that conversation produces a genuine Chinese commitment to pressure Tehran toward a deal, the diplomatic process has a real chance of moving forward. If it does not, if the Beijing meeting produces only vague language about regional stability, while China continues to provide Iran with economic and technical lifelines, then the pressure on Iran to make concessions will remain insufficient. And if the pressure is insufficient, and if the military situation in the Strait produces another incident, another ship struck, another emergency landing, another South Korean vow of retaliation, the spark that ignites the next escalation becomes increasingly likely. The one spark in the Strait of Hormuz that everyone fears is not a dramatic planned attack. It is an accident. It is a miscommunication. It is an Iranian fast boat and an American destroyer in the same narrow water at night, with both sides operating under rules of engagement that authorize responding to perceived threats. It is a South Korean vessel whose captain decides he has waited long enough at anchor and tries to transit without coordinating with Iran. It is an F-35 that squawks an emergency code, and the Iranian air defense system that sees it and interprets it as a threat. These are the moments that start wars that nobody planned to start. And the Strait of Hormuz right now is full of those moments. Every single day, every single night. The diplomacy needs to work. It needs to work soon. And it needs to be conducted by professionals, not by social media posts in capital letters. Because the cost of it failing is a conflict that none of the parties, not America, not Iran, not South Korea, not the global economy, can afford.